I don't believe in miracles because some of you saw that I posted that on Facebook as an open-ended sentence. I don't believe in miracles because, and Madeline, who we just sent from our church family to Florida to be a pastor, said, I don't believe always. I'm conditioned to be skeptical. I wonder if Jesus, if he returned, would I recognize him? It's less about what he looks like and more about whether or not I would believe his miracles, right? I mean, chances are I'd see them and think, con artist, fake, just another person out for money or fame. I'm taught to be suspicious. There's an explanation, isn't there, for everything. She makes a great point. I mean, are not biblical miracles outdated as they come before all that we can now understand? Scientific law, natural law. Now, the dictionary defines a miracle this way: a surprising event not that can be explained by natural or scientific laws and therefore considered a work of a divine agency. It goes on to say that these are not events that violate what we know to be true about science or about nature. These are events that transcend, that come around and break into supernatural. You believe in miracles, do you? And Ashley writes about her body that could not scientifically conceive or carry a baby to full term, and yet it did, and it does again right now. I believe in miracles, one of you tells me, because the markers for your cancer are so much lower than they're supposed to be scientifically. Duke can't tell you what's going on. They tell you the chemo isn't good enough to be this good. What's going on? Miracles that transcend what we know. Supernatural. But is a miracle only which transcends? Are all miracles supernatural? Lazarus, raised up from death to life in this story. But is that the only miracle in this story? In the Bible, there's no word exactly like that word miracle. Typically, they use the word sign. Say sign. And we see signs all the time in our life, right? Every day. We know what a sign does is point beyond itself, right, to something else. A sign designed to point beyond itself. A miracle as a sign. Supernatural, yes, but natural. Extraordinary, but also ordinary. Every day. That not only points beyond us to God, but tells us something about who God is or who God is not. In verse 6, Jesus hears that his friend is sick, but he stays for 2 more days, and it's on purpose. He does not get held up by something. It's intentional that he waits and delays and drags his feet. Why? Because he sees in this death an inbreaking of God's glory, and he wants to make sure that no one misses it. So he waits days. By the time that he gets to Lazarus, he's sure to be dead. Because in the Jewish belief of that time, they believed that the spirit sat nearby the body for 3 days. But on the 4th, gone, good and dead. He waits till Lazarus is good and dead. And there are these two sisters who send a message to Jesus to come and heal their brother, and they believe in the miracle. They believe that Jesus will show up, but no. The funeral home is called. They find themselves at the graveside. I don't believe in miracles because, and a friend of mine that I've known since I was 9 years old says this: I don't want to believe because they're scary. Asking for a miracle is often an act of desperation, she writes, naming the very thing that leaves us most vulnerable, broken. An ask that requires exposing the very corners of our hearts, and that is hard work. It's dark, frightening places where the coffee is bitter, the tiles are dirty, the chair's uncomfortable, and the clock ticks, ticks, ticks. A waiting room. And I can see her there. She's taken right back to that waiting room at UVA Hospital. Her mom in the bed, the aneurysm that has exploded, the decision to turn off the machines. Do I believe in miracles? For Mary and Martha, at a graveside, and 4 days too late, God shows up? Do I believe? And whatever the holy purpose might be for his delay, the pain that is caused is real. For Mary, for Martha, for us. Lord, if you had only been there. They both say this. If you had only been there, this would not have happened. If you'd only shown up, God, he would not have died. She would not have died. I stood here in this sanctuary this week with a young woman, and we were looking at this image together, reading the story. This young person who is persistent in faith, asking good God questions, showing up. And I wondered where she found herself in this story. One who is so faithful. Surely she would say, yes, I believe in miracles. I find myself at the place where Jesus' miracle takes hold. And instead she said, my dad died, and still I ask the question, or I make the statement back to God, if you had been there, he would not have died. Where were you, Lord? Couldn't you have done more, Lord? Why? And could not these questions themselves be a form of miracle when they're asked in the midst of someone who continues to turn back to God? Could this be an ordinary signpost directed back to the God who is not answering yet, who doesn't show up the way that we would exactly hope for? Could this be an ordinary sign for me this week when one of you came into the sanctuary in the middle of your workday in tears to kneel at this rail and say, today has been a day of death and dead end. And still tomorrow I will use my gifts for God, and still tomorrow I will show up again in that place called work, called ministry, and again I will believe that God's hope and life and love will meet me there. Is that not a miracle? A pastor I know writes about miracles to me. I prayed for a miracle, and my parents still divorced, and my mom still has cancer, and I'm still gay. And I'm still loved, and I'm still valued, and I'm still praying. Miracles, they happen, just not the way I plan. Jesus finally arrives. And Mary runs and she says this, "Even now I know, God, that you will give Jesus whatever you ask of him. Even now I know that God will give you, Jesus, whatever you ask of him." And in the midst of hopelessness, she still believes. A signpost, a miracle. Extraordinary? Yes. Ordinary? Yes. And in response, Jesus does what? And in response, Jesus weeps. God cries. And that word in the Greek is not just a word about grieving. It's a word that's used when people are angry in their grieving. It's a word that's used when horses snort and stomp. Intense emotion. And so the question is, right, is Jesus angry at them or with them? God in Jesus, all-powerful God, not unmoved by our despair, sharing in it, weeping along with us, even as God longs for our eyes to again see God with us. And then he demands life to come out. Come out of this place of hopelessness. Come out of a dead end. Come out of death. And that command creates what is not there before, life, and it draws us into the knowledge and the hope of those who follow the one crucified and risen, one from whom, when we are pressed to the edge, when we are pressed and stripped of certainty, and when we're forced with the end of all that we know, there. Thrown back, not out, thrown back to the mercy and the love of a God who commands life in the midst of death. And in time calling each of us, come out of fear, come out of loneliness, come out. And we get that responsibility of calling out life is not ours. God creates life. God recreates life. And yet one of my favorite parts of this story is this, that God invites us to be a part of it with him, right? Because who removes the stone so that Lazarus can walk out into the light? We do. And he is bound up in grave cloth. And who unbinds him? That's right, Joanna, we do. That God invites us to be a part of hope in the midst of death, possibility. Signposts in our world of Christ resurrected. Ordinary me and you, signposts in the Gulf of Grief in Orlando today, in Baghdad. Signposts of ordinary us, pointing back to a God of hope in the midst of the flooding in West Virginia, or close to home with the words that we offer, and I'm sorry, turned extraordinary, and I love you, I see you, Justin, you belong, Gary. These words that the power of God uses to bring out of the graves our death and our dying into hope and possibility. Do you believe in miracles? And my friend who's sitting in that waiting room years ago says this, thank God, God ignores visiting hours. Thank God, God refuses to leave. My stubborn God persists, sits by me, buys me a bagel when I can't bother to feed myself, holds my hand, and even when the answer is no, and the answer was no, I cannot deny God has been here. Do you believe in miracles? Do you and I believe that part of God's working of wonder in this world is in and through each of us. We, signs that point to God. Ordinary, extraordinary. And I do find that hard to believe. How can God use me as a signpost, as a miracle in someone else's life? When, Stephen, I have my doubts. When I get angry, Charles. When I am confused and hurt, fearful myself. And that is one thing I love so much about the words that are etched in our window. This is the last verse from the story of Lazarus. And notice what it says. Many believed in his name when they saw the miracles. Many believed when they saw. It doesn't say many believed and then they saw miracles, right? Many believed because they saw, when they saw. You see, miracles don't wait on our faith. God does not wait on us, but goes ahead of us. That even in the midst of my own coming from the grave into hope, that yes, God invites us to be signposts in God's world. I can't wait until Ann Hall can be with us in worship. Ann says this, "No, I did not get my miracle. I did not get my foot healed. It was amputated. But I got a far greater miracle. I saw the back of the hem of God's garment dart through that hospital. Physicians, surgeons, housekeepers, cooks, signs of God, unbinding my despair, my fear through their love and their mercy and their kindness, co-creators with the God who lives now, who redeems now, who's redeeming always this world to God's self." Do we believe in miracles? Amen.